He had nothing. No money, no connections, no powerful last name. Just a 7-year-old girl who called him daddy, and a love so fierce it had kept him standing through years that should have broken him. Then one Tuesday morning, a black town car pulled up outside his building, and the woman who had walked away without looking back came home. Not for him, not for forgiveness, but for his daughter. And she brought lawyers. If this story hits something in your chest, hit that like button and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this one travels. The alarm went off at 4:47 a.m., 13 minutes before it was supposed to, because the clock on Ryan Carter's nightstand had been running fast for 2 months, and he hadn't gotten around to fixing it. He lay there for a second in the gray dark, listening to the heat kick on in the walls and the distant sound of a garbage truck grinding through the street below, and then he sat up. The apartment was cold the way cheap apartments get cold in November. Not dangerously cold, but the kind of cold that reminds you every morning that the insulation is bad, and the windows are old, and the landlord is the sort of man who returns calls about 3 weeks after you stop expecting him to. Ryan had stuffed a rolled bath towel along the bottom of the window in Sophia's room back in October. It helped. A little. He put his feet on the floor and sat there for a moment with his elbows on his knees, eyes closed, doing the thing he'd been doing every morning for the past 4 years. Just breathing. Just reminding himself what the day was for. Sophia. He got up. The bathroom mirror showed him the usual. 32 years old, dark circles that had become a permanent feature somewhere around his 28th birthday, jaw that needed a shave he'd probably skip, a scar above his left eyebrow from a construction site accident 2 years ago that had healed crooked. He looked like what he was, a man who didn't sleep enough and worked too much and ate standing up over the kitchen sink more often than he sat at a table. He splashed water on his face, dried it with a hand towel, and went to start coffee. The apartment was small. He'd stopped describing it to people after a while because the descriptions always came out sounding like apologies. 540 square feet on the 4th floor of a building on Clement Street in the outer Richmond district of San Francisco. The part of the city that tourists never visited and real estate developers hadn't fully gotten to yet, which was the only reason Ryan could afford to live there at all. 1 bedroom. Sophia slept in it. Ryan slept on a fold-out couch that had a bar in the middle that he'd learned to sleep around. The same way you learn to sleep around anything if you do it long enough. The kitchen was barely big enough for 2 people to stand in without touching. The living room had the couch, a second-hand coffee table, Sophia's art supplies in a plastic bin in the corner, and a shelf of children's books that had expanded over the years until it colonized most of the wall. The bathroom had a clawfoot tub that was the one genuinely good thing about the place. Sophia loved it. She called it the Princess Bath, which Ryan had learned to hear without the particular twist of feeling it used to give him. The feeling of wishing he could give her something more than a second-hand tub in a $400 a month apartment. He'd been in this apartment for 3 years. Before that, he and Sophia had spent 8 months in a 2-bedroom they'd shared with his cousin Marcus and Marcus's girlfriend after Ryan lost the job at the warehouse and couldn't make rent on the place they'd been living before that. Before that was the place on Geary, which was where they'd moved after Olivia left, and which Ryan could not think about without a specific, physical sensation in his chest that he'd learned to mostly avoid. He poured coffee into a mug with a chip in the handle that he kept meaning to throw away and carried it to the window. Outside, Clement Street was just waking up. A few early commuters, the owner of the dim sum restaurant on the corner rolling up his front gate, a woman walking a very small dog wrapped in a coat. The fog was in, thick and gray and absolute, the way it got in the fall, and the streetlights were still on. Ryan liked this hour. He liked the quiet before Sophia woke up. Not because he needed a break from her, but because the quiet hour was when he could think clearly about the day ahead and get his head right before it started. He had a shift at Dylan's Hardware starting at 7, then 3 hours of online coursework he was trying to fit in during Sophia's school day, then pick up at 3:15, then dinner, homework, bath, story, sleep. He was also covering Saturday at the hardware store this week, and he had a gig doing moving work with his friend Danny on Sunday morning that would put maybe $80 in his account, which was not nothing. He stood at the window and drank his coffee and thought through the schedule the same way he always did. Methodically, like a logistics problem, because that was the only way it worked. Sophia woke up at 6:10, which was 5 minutes earlier than usual, and announced itself with the sound of her feet hitting the floor and then immediate footsteps coming down the short hallway, quick and purposeful, the way she always moved. She was wearing her pajamas, a set with little rockets on them that Ryan's sister had sent for her birthday. And her hair was a full catastrophe, a tangle of dark curls that defied physics and daily brushing with equal indifference. "Daddy," she said, climbing up onto the couch next to him without preamble, "I dreamed about space again." "Yeah?" Ryan put his arm around her. "I was on the moon," she said, "but it wasn't like the moon looks in pictures, it was more colorful, and there was a garden." On the moon. A space garden. She looked up at him with the complete seriousness she brought to most things. Sophia Carter was a child who did not traffic in half measures. Everything was either entirely fascinating or entirely unacceptable, and she had opinions about both categories. "It's fiction, Daddy. The garden wasn't real, but it felt real." "Did you have a spacesuit?" "I don't think I needed one, because it was a dream." She paused. "Also, I think I was an astronaut." Ryan looked at her serious dark eyes, and the rocket pajamas, and the hair that was somehow both ridiculous and wonderful, and felt the specific combination of love and fear and exhaustion that defined most of his waking hours and a significant portion of his sleeping ones. It wasn't a comfortable feeling, exactly, but it was the most honest feeling he had. "Okay," he said. "Astronaut. We can work with that." She squinted at him. "You always say that." "Because it's always true." He pushed himself off the couch. "You want eggs or cereal?" "Eggs with the green stuff." "Spinach." "The green stuff." "If you're going to be an astronaut," Ryan said, walking to the kitchen, "you're going to have to be able to name the food you eat. NASA cares about that." From the couch. "Does NASA really care about that?" "Probably." A pause. "Spinach eggs," Sophia said, with the tone of someone making a formal concession. "Please." He got her to school by 8:20, which was technically fine, but gave neither of them much room. The school was 11 blocks away. Ryan had specifically chosen the apartment partly for the proximity, and they walked it most mornings, cutting through the park when the weather allowed, taking the covered route when it didn't. This morning the fog was still heavy, but it wasn't raining, so they went through the park, Sophia walking with one hand in Ryan's and the other swinging the strap of her backpack with the specific rhythmic focus she applied to anything that involved motion. She talked the whole way. She usually did. She was telling him about a disagreement she was having with her friend Priya about whether dogs were better than cats, a debate she had strong views about and had apparently been waging across multiple recesses. "Priya says cats are more independent," Sophia said, "but I said that's not a real argument because independent doesn't mean better. Grandma is independent and she's still nice." Ryan decided not to examine the logic of that comparison too closely. "What did Priya say?" "She said I was changing the subject." Sophia frowned. "I wasn't, though. I was expanding the argument." "There's a difference." "Yes, a big one." She looked up at him. "Daddy, do you think we could ever get a dog? We've talked about this. We've talked about it in the apartment we have now, but maybe in a different apartment. Soph. Like a bigger one, or one with a yard." "Sophia," she sighed. It was a theatrical sigh, the kind she'd been perfecting since around age 5. "Fine. When things are more stable," Ryan said, which was the answer he always gave, and which they both understood as a non-answer, a holding position, a way of saying I hear you, and I'm not saying no, but I'm also not saying yes without any of those words. Sophia accepted it the way she always did, by filing it away and not pressing, which was a quality Ryan suspected she'd developed specifically in response to him. She was, for 7 years old, extraordinarily good at reading the edges of his stress. He dropped her at the school gate, crouched down to her level for the goodbye hug, a ritual she still submitted to without complaint, though he was aware there was probably a timer on that, and watched her disappear through the doors. He stood there for a second longer than necessary. Then he turned around and went to work. Dillon's Hardware was owned by a man named Frank Dillon, who was 63 years old, had been in the hardware business for 40 years, and had the disposition of someone who had seen a great many people do a great many foolish things with their home improvement projects, and had decided that patience was the only viable response. He liked Ryan, which he expressed in the specific way that older men of a certain type express affection, by giving him more responsibility than he was technically being paid for and occasionally buying him a sandwich. Ryan had been working at Dillon's for 14 months. It was his primary job, the one with the semi-regular hours, and the owner who'd worked out a schedule that accommodated Sophia's school pickup. He also picked up moving gigs when he could through a guy he knew named Danny Park. And for a period last year, he had done late-night Uber driving 2 nights a week until the math stopped making sense after wear on the car. It was a lot of hours. He'd done the calculation once, laid out across a week, and stopped counting at 62 because it didn't help to know the exact number. He was stacking plumbing supplies when Frank came to find him at 11:30 that morning. Frank had the look of someone who needed to say something and wasn't sure how to start. "Got a call for you," Frank said. "Up front." Ryan looked at him. "Call? My cell?" "Not your cell, here. The store." Frank's expression was a little odd. "Woman. Said she couldn't reach you on your cell." Ryan put down the length of PVC he was holding. He didn't know why he felt something shift in his chest right then. There was no reason, logically. It could have been anything, but the way Frank was looking at him carried information that Frank wasn't saying. He went to the front counter and picked up the receiver. "Hello?" "Ryan." The voice was precise and controlled and entirely familiar, in the way that something you haven't heard in 6 years can still be completely recognizable, like a song you used to know. "It's Olivia." He didn't say anything for a second. The store hummed around him, someone in the paint section shaking a can, the bell over the door, Frank very deliberately finding something to do on the other side of the store. "I know," Olivia said, "that this is a surprise." "Yeah," Ryan said. "That's a word for it." "I need to talk to you. I'm in San Francisco. I'd like to meet in person if—" "What do you want, Olivia?" A pause. When she spoke again, the controlled quality in her voice was the same, but underneath it there was something else. A precision, a preparedness, that Ryan recognized as the sound of someone who had already decided what they were going to say and had been practicing it. "I want to see Sophia," Olivia said, "and I want to talk to you about her future. I think we need to have a real conversation about what's best for her going forward." Ryan's hand tightened on the receiver. "She's my daughter," he said. "She's doing fine." "Ryan, I'm at work." "I know. That's why I called the store. I assumed you'd be working." There was nothing overtly pointed about the way she said it. That was the thing about Olivia. The point was always there, but it was buried just deep enough that you couldn't call it out directly. "I'd like to meet tonight. Or tomorrow. Whenever works for you." He looked out through the front window of the store at the street. Cars passing, a woman with a stroller, the fog still hanging heavy over everything. "Tomorrow," he said. "I'll text you the time." He hung up before she could say anything else. But he didn't tell Sophia that night. He made the spinach eggs he'd promised that morning. He'd forgotten to make them at breakfast, and she had not let him forget it. And he let her tell him about the dog versus cat debate, which had apparently escalated during lunch to involve a third party named Marcus Chen, who thought fish were the superior pets for reasons Sophia found baffling and somewhat insulting. He helped her with her reading homework, which she was good at but impatient with, and he sat on the edge of the tub while she had her bath and listened to her talk about how the International Space Station had a lot of problems with mold, a fact she had learned from a library book and found both disgusting and fascinating. "Why does it get mold?" Ryan asked. "Because of the moisture. Humans breathe out moisture, and it has to go somewhere, and in a closed environment it goes to the walls and equipment. That's a problem." "Yeah, but they're working on it." She dunked her head under the water briefly, came up with her hair plastered flat. "I'm going to work on it. The mold problem. And other problems. There's a lot of them." She said it with the matter-of-fact confidence of someone who had already decided her future career was simply a matter of implementation. "I'm going to fix the mold, and I have an idea about oxygen recycling, and also I think the sleeping pods could be better designed." Ryan handed her a towel. "You've been thinking about this a lot." "I think about it pretty much every day." She stood up, wrapped herself in the towel. "Is that weird?" "No," Ryan said honestly. "I think that's exactly how people get good at things." She looked at him for a moment. One of those looks she gave him sometimes that felt older than she was, like she was doing some kind of calculation behind her eyes. Then she nodded, apparently satisfied, and shuffled past him toward her room. He turned out her light at 8:45. She was asleep before 9, the way she usually was. She slept hard, the way children do when they've spent the day fully engaged with being alive. Ryan went back to the couch and sat in the quiet with the lamp off and looked at the ceiling and thought about the phone call. Olivia Bennet. He had not spoken to her in nearly 3 years, not since the brief, brutal exchange at his mother's Christmas gathering that had ended with both of them saying things neither had apologized for since. Before that, contact had been intermittent and mostly practical, mediated through the informal arrangement they'd arrived at when she moved to New York, which was that she would send money occasionally and Ryan would send photographs occasionally, and they would both pretend that this constituted some kind of co-parenting agreement rather than what it actually was, which was two people who couldn't be in the same room and a child who had learned not to ask certain questions. Sophia had been 14 months old when Olivia left. Ryan had never tried to get her to stay. That was the part that people didn't know. The part that didn't fit the story they assembled from the pieces they could see. Most people, when they heard the outline, assumed there had been a scene, a confrontation, an ultimatum someone failed to meet. What had actually happened was quieter and, in some ways, worse. Olivia had come to him on a February evening and told him, in the same controlled and precise way she'd spoken to him on the phone today, that she had accepted a position heading a division of a financial technology company based in New York and that she was leaving. That was it. Not, I want to leave, not I've been thinking about leaving. She was leaving, in 3 weeks. Ryan had looked at her for a long time. He'd asked once what she wanted him to say. She'd said she didn't know. He'd asked about Sophia, and Olivia had said, and he'd heard these exact words replayed in his head enough times over the past 6 years that they'd lost most of their texture and become just a string of syllables. She'd said that she knew he was the right parent to have primary custody, that she trusted him, that she would be involved, that it wasn't abandonment, that Sophia would know her mother. He hadn't argued. He didn't have the capacity to argue. Standing in their kitchen on a February evening with their daughter asleep in the next room and his entire future quietly detonating in front of him. What he'd felt, mostly, was something that didn't really have a name, a kind of grief that wasn't about losing Olivia exactly, because they'd already lost each other before that night, but about losing the version of the future he'd been building in his head. The one where things were hard, but they figured it out together. Where Sophia grew up with both parents present, where the story came out right. 6 years was a long time, though. Long enough to build a different story. Long enough to discover that you were more capable than you'd thought, and that your daughter could be extraordinary in ways that had nothing to do with what you could afford to give her, and that the hard years weren't only hard, they were also, in their way, the most real years you'd ever have. He told himself that enough times that he mostly believed it. Now he sat in the dark and thought about Olivia's voice on the phone, the specific preparedness underneath the controlled surface, and felt the quiet arrival of something he recognized as fear sent. They met at a coffee shop on Union Street at 11 the next morning, Ryan's only free window, squeezed between the hardware store morning and pickup. He got there 5 minutes early and found a corner table and sat down, and then Olivia walked in, and it struck him, as it always did after a period of not seeing her, that she looked like herself. He'd never quite been able to explain this to anyone. Olivia Bennet didn't look dramatically different from the woman he'd been with 7 years ago. She was 30 years old, which meant she'd been 23 when they met, and 24 when Sophia was born, and 24 still when she left, a fact Ryan had had to stop letting himself think about for a period because it complicated the anger. She was tall, composed, with dark hair cut shorter than she used to wear it, dressed in the kind of effortless precision that Ryan associated with people who had enough money that getting dressed wasn't something they had to think about. She looked well. She looked successful. She looked exactly like what she apparently was, which was the CEO of a fintech company with offices in New York and San Francisco and, according to a profile he'd seen somewhere north of 400 employees. She sat down. She ordered a black coffee. She looked at Ryan across the table and said, "You look tired." "I work a lot," Ryan said. "I know." There was a moment where they were just looking at each other, the first real eye contact in 3 years, and Ryan felt the full weight of everything that sat between them, all the unresolved sediment of the years, the things said and unsaid, the absence of Olivia in Sophia's life, and the presence she'd apparently decided it was time to reclaim. "You said you want to talk about Sophia's future," Ryan said. He wasn't going to soften the conversation. "Say what you mean by that." Olivia wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. "She's 7 years old. She's at a developmental stage where her environment matters enormously, where she's forming the foundations of how she sees herself and what she believes is possible for her life. She said it carefully, like someone laying out the points of an argument. I've been doing a lot of thinking about this, Ryan. About my role. About what I owe her. You've been doing a lot of thinking, Ryan said. Yes. For the last 6 years. Olivia met his eyes. I know how that sounds. Do you? Yes. Her voice didn't change, which was both infuriating and, Ryan admitted to himself, something he'd always begrudgingly respected about her. She didn't flinch from hard things, not in the moment they arrived. She processed them somewhere else, somewhere private, and came back with her conclusions already formed. I made a choice when Sophia was a baby that I believed was best for everyone at the time. I'm not going to defend it today. I'm telling you that I've reassessed and I want to be more present in her life. You want visitation, Ryan said. That's fine. We can figure out. I want to discuss custody. He heard it. The way the sentence landed, not as a request, but as a statement of intent. No, he said. Ryan, 7 years old, she doesn't know you. You've been in New York for 6 years and she gets a birthday card and sometimes an email. You don't get to just come in and... He stopped, got himself level. No. I have resources, Olivia said carefully. I have a home, stability, a career that provides significant financial... She has stability, Ryan said. She has me. She has a father who works 60 hours a week. She has a 500-square-foot apartment. She has one parent who's so exhausted he can barely... Olivia stopped herself. I'm not saying this to be cruel. I'm saying that I can give her things you can't. Opportunities. A room of her own. A school that... She has a school. Ryan. Olivia set down her cup. I've consulted with a family attorney. I believe a court would look favorably at... You've already talked to a lawyer. I came prepared for this conversation. Yes. He looked at her. The fear he'd felt the night before was in the room now, very present, sitting right alongside him. Get out, he said quietly. Ryan, I'm not doing this here. He stood up. His voice was level, but his hands weren't, and he put them in his pockets so she couldn't see. If you want to file something, file it, but don't sit there and tell me I'm holding my daughter back. Don't sit there and... Don't. He picked up his jacket. She knows my name, he said. When she had a fever last year at 2 a.m, she called for me. When she woke up scared, she came to me. When she wants to tell someone about astronauts and space mold and whether dogs are better than cats, she comes to me. She's not a portfolio you can optimize. She's my kid. He walked out. He made it half a block before he stopped on the sidewalk, hands out of his pockets now, pressing against the side of a building because his knees were doing something they shouldn't. 6 years of hard work. 6 years of holding it together. 6 years of telling himself they were going to be fine, they were fine. Sophia was going to grow up knowing she was loved and safe, and that someone would always be there. And now Olivia had a lawyer, and money, and a plan. And Ryan had a fold-out couch, and a chip in a coffee mug, and 62 hours a week of his life committed to paying for it all. He stood on the sidewalk in the fog and breathed until his knees came back. Then he went to work. His sister, Diane, called him that evening while he was making dinner. Sophia was in her room, organizing something, producing the specific series of thumps and repositionings that meant she was rearranging her bookshelves again. Ryan stood at the stove and told Diane everything. When he finished, there was a pause. She has a lawyer already? Diane said. That's what she said. Ryan. A longer pause. You need a lawyer. I know that. I can help with... Diane, you've already done... Don't finish that sentence. She said it flatly. Diane Carter was 36, lived in Oakland, ran a small accounting firm, and had a personal policy against accepting gratitude for things she'd decided to do voluntarily. She had kept Ryan afloat in several specific moments over the past 6 years in ways that he never spoke about and she never brought up. You need representation. Olivia's not threatening you, Ryan. She's informing you of what's already started. There's a difference. He knew that. He'd known it since he walked out of the coffee shop. She can't win, he said. The words felt shaky even as he said them. She can't win a trial, Diane said carefully. That doesn't mean she can't make it very expensive and very miserable to get there. That's the play, Ryan. Make it so hard to fight that you... She stopped. Get a lawyer. I'm putting some money in your account tomorrow. Diane. I'm hanging up now, she said. I love you. Get a lawyer. She hung up. Ryan put the phone down on the counter and stood at the stove, watching the onions in the pan, not really seeing them. Behind him, down the hall, Sophia made a triumphant sound. Apparently the bookshelf organization had reached a successful conclusion. "Daddy," she called, "can you come look? I put all the space books in order of how far away the things are." Ryan took a breath. "Yeah," he called back. "Give me 2 minutes." He made dinner. He went and looked at the bookshelf, which was, he had to admit, extremely organized. He told her it was impressive, which it was. He did not tell her anything about the coffee shop that morning, or the phone call the night before, or the fact that somewhere on the other side of the city, a woman with good lawyers and a strategic mind was in the process of deciding how to take his daughter away from him. He read Sophia a chapter from the book she was currently obsessed with, a science fiction novel written for middle schoolers that she'd gotten from the library and was technically above her reading level, and which she was reading anyway with a dictionary open beside her. He turned off her light. He sat in the dark living room. He pulled out his phone and looked up family law attorneys in San Francisco and sat there staring at the list for a long time before finally writing down 2 names he couldn't really afford and making a note to call in the morning. Down the hall, Sophia's breathing went long and slow and even. Ryan folded up the couch cushions, pulled out the bed, found the position that avoided the bar in the middle, and lay there staring at the ceiling until some time past 2. The letter arrived 4 days later. Official stationery, law firm address in embossed navy ink. Ryan stood at the mailbox in the lobby of his building and read the first paragraph and then went upstairs and read it again at the kitchen table before Sophia woke up. Bennett V.T. Carter. Petition for modification of custody arrangement. Standard language, professional phrasing. The kind of thing that was designed to sound measured and reasonable, and which, if you were on the receiving end of it, felt like the floor dropping out from under you. Olivia's attorney had outlined her position in 2 pages. The key arguments were what Ryan had expected: financial disparity, living conditions, work schedule, educational opportunities. The letter was careful. It didn't call Ryan a bad father, it simply argued that circumstances had changed and that Sophia's best interests required a reassessment. Sophia's best interests. Ryan set the letter down. He thought about his daughter, asleep in the next room, in her bed full of science books and rocket pajamas, dreaming about space gardens that were more colorful than they were supposed to be. He picked up his phone. Diane had deposited money in his account the evening before. He found the name of the attorney he'd circled, a woman named Patricia Hollis, who specialized in family law and had reviews that suggested she was good at exactly this kind of case, and dialed before he could talk himself into waiting for a better time. The phone rang 3 times. Someone answered. "Hollis Law," a voice said. "My name is Ryan Carter," Ryan said. His voice was steady. He'd decided the night before that his voice was going to stay steady, whatever happened, because Sophia would eventually be old enough to know this story, and he wanted her to know he didn't fall apart. "I need to schedule a consultation, as soon as possible. I'm dealing with a custody modification petition, and I need someone in my corner." "Let me get you our scheduler," the voice said. Ryan sat at the kitchen table with the letter in front of him, the November fog pressing against the kitchen window, and waited. Down the hall, he could hear Sophia starting to stir. The small sounds of someone waking up, the creak of her bed, the soft thump of her feet hitting the floor. He had 16 minutes until he needed to start making breakfast. He used them. Patricia Hollis had an office on the 2nd floor of a narrow building on Sacramento Street, sandwiched between a dry cleaner and an insurance broker, and the waiting room had 3 chairs and a plant that was either extremely resilient or fake. Ryan sat in one of the chairs on a Thursday morning and tried not to look like a man who had spent the previous 2 nights reading legal definitions on his phone until his eyes gave out. She came out herself to get him, which he hadn't expected. He'd assumed there'd be an assistant. She was in her mid-50s with short gray hair and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, and the kind of directness that some people mistake for coldness, until they realize it's just efficiency. She shook his hand, led him into her office, offered him coffee, and when he said yes, poured it from a machine on the credenza without ceremony. "Tell me everything," she said. "Don't edit, don't decide what matters. I'll figure that out." So Ryan told her. All of it. The original arrangement, the informal non-agreement, the birthday cards and the photographs, and the 3 years of near silence. He told her about Olivia's company, what he knew of it, the profile he'd read, the offices in 2 cities. He put the letter on her desk. She picked it up and read it in the careful way lawyers read things, which looked like ordinary reading but produced a different kind of attention. When he finished, she set the letter down and looked at him. "How many hours a week do you work?" she asked. He told her. She wrote something down without visible reaction, which he took as a bad sign. Living situation. 540 square feet. 4th floor, Clement Street. 1 bedroom. Sophia sleeps there. I take the couch. Couch. Pull out. Another note. Income. He told her that too. All of it. The hardware store, the moving gigs, the period with the rideshare driving he'd stopped. He laid it out flat, without the instinct to frame it or contextualize it, because she'd told him not to edit, and he decided to trust that instruction. When he was done, Patricia Hollis set down her pen and looked at him across the desk. "Okay," she said, "here's where you are. Olivia's attorneys are going to argue that you're stretched thin. They're going to use the word stability a lot, not because it's a legal term, but because judges respond to it, and they know that. They'll present photographs of her apartment, her lifestyle, what she can afford for Sophia's schooling. They'll make it look like the obvious choice." "And I'm the guy with the pull-out couch," Ryan said. "You're also the guy who has been Sophia's entire world for 6 years," Patricia said, without softening it or hardening it, just stating the fact. Courts are not purely transactional, despite what Olivia's team is counting on. A judge is going to want to know who this child is, how she got there, and who was present for every step of it. That's your case. She paused. "But I'm going to need documentation. Teachers, pediatricians, neighbors, anyone who has seen you functioning as this child's primary parent on a consistent basis. Can you get me names?" "Yes," Ryan said, "and you need to be prepared for things to get personal. They will find every gap in your record and present it as evidence of inadequacy. The goal isn't to convict you of anything. It's to make you look like a man who's doing his best with not enough, which is technically accurate, and which their attorney will frame as a reason for the court to intervene." Ryan looked at her. "Can she win?" Patricia was quiet for a moment. "She can win the argument on paper," she said. "The real question is whether the judge believes that what you've built with Sophia outweighs what Olivia can offer materially. That's the fight." She picked up her pen again. "And it's winnable. I wouldn't take the case if I didn't think it was winnable." He wrote her a check that was most of what Diane had put in his account, shook her hand, and walked out onto Sacramento Street in the weak November sun, feeling somehow both more afraid and less alone than he'd been walking in. He didn't tell Sophia about any of it for another 2 weeks. He told himself this was because he was waiting for the right moment, but the honest answer was that he didn't know how to say it, and every time he sat down next to her in the evenings, and she was telling him about the space books, or the ongoing dog versus cat discourse, or a new theory she had about asteroid mining, the words dissolved somewhere between his brain and his mouth. She found out on a Saturday. He'd left the letter on the kitchen table. Not intentionally, just tired, just the accumulated fatigue of 60 hours and mounting legal anxiety, eroding the careful habit of keeping anything difficult out of her reach. He was in the bathroom when he heard her go quiet in the kitchen, which was a specific quality of quiet distinct from the ordinary quiet of a child occupied with something, and he came out and found her sitting at the table with the letter in her hands. She was reading it. She read slowly, moving her lips a little, the way she did when the words were hard, but she was reading it. Ryan crossed the kitchen in 3 steps and sat down across from her. She looked up. Her face was doing something complicated. "Is this about me?" she asked. There were approximately 17 different wrong answers to that question, and Ryan didn't say any of them. "Yes," he said. "Who's Olivia Bennett?" Not a question. A recitation of the name on the letterhead, asking him to connect the name to what she already suspected, because Sophia at 7 was not a child who missed many things. "That's your mom, Soph." She looked at the letter, then back at him. "She wants me to live with her. She wants the court to consider it, yeah. I don't want to live with her." She said it simply, without drama, the way she said most things, like a conclusion she'd reached through a process of reasoning and was now reporting. Ryan chose his next words with care. "I know, and that matters. What you want matters a lot in this." "Then why is there a letter?" "Because it's not just about what you want, at your age. There's a legal process. I have a lawyer who's going to—" "Are you going to lose?" she asked. Ryan looked at his daughter. at the way she was holding herself very still, both hands flat on the letter, as if she was physically holding the situation in place. "No," he said. "How do you know?" "Because I know everything about you and she doesn't." He said it without thinking, and as soon as it was out, he realized it was the truest answer he had. "I know you sleep on your right side and you need a glass of water before bed, and you won't eat anything orange except mashed sweet potatoes, and the dark bothers you if the door is more than halfway closed. I know your best friend is Priya, and your second best friend is a book about Mars. I know you're going to be an astronaut, and I know you've been planning it since you were 4. He stopped. "She doesn't know any of that, and when the judge asks her, she's not going to be able to answer." Sophia was quiet for a moment. Then, "What if the judge doesn't ask her?" "My lawyer's going to make sure they do." She thought about this. He could see her working through it. The same process she applied to everything, methodical and honest, not avoiding the hard parts. "Okay," she said finally. "Okay?" "Okay, I believe you." She slid the letter back across the table. "Can we have breakfast?" Ryan picked up the letter. "Yeah, spinach eggs?" She made a face. "Regular eggs." "You just said—" "I changed my mind. It's a Saturday." She slid off the chair and went to the refrigerator. "Also, Daddy?" "Yeah. I'm not going anywhere." She opened the refrigerator and looked inside with the focused concentration she applied to refrigerators. "Just so we're clear." He folded the letter and put it in his jacket pocket. "Yeah," he said. "I know." The first hearing was a preliminary one, procedural, Patricia had told him, designed to establish the timeline and confirm both parties' standing. It happened in a downtown courthouse on a Wednesday morning, in a conference room that smelled like coffee and carpet cleaner, with a court-appointed mediator rather than a judge. Ryan had never been in any kind of legal proceeding before. The closest he'd come was a traffic dispute 4 years ago that had been resolved in about 11 minutes in a municipal office. This was different. Olivia was already there when he arrived, seated at one side of the long table with 2 attorneys Ryan didn't know and a woman who appeared to be taking notes. She was wearing a jacket that probably cost more than Ryan's monthly rent, and she looked composed and ready in the way that people look when they've been here before. Ryan sat down next to Patricia. Across the table, Olivia met his eyes briefly and then looked at her attorneys. The mediator ran through the procedural items. Ryan mostly listened and let Patricia speak, which she did in the measured, specific way she did everything. Not aggressive, not defensive, just precise. She established the documented history of Ryan's primary custody, submitted the initial evidence package she'd assembled, noted the absence of any formal custody agreement in the existing record, and clarified Ryan's standing as the sole custodial parent of record. Olivia's lead attorney, a man named Faulkner, was smooth and practiced in the way expensive attorneys are smooth and practiced. Nothing loud, nothing crude, just a gradual layering of implication. He was careful to frame everything as being about Sophia's opportunities rather than Ryan's failures, which Ryan recognized as deliberate and which Patricia had warned him about. "My client has undergone significant professional development in the intervening period," Faulkner said at one point, "and is now in a position to offer Sophia a life of substantially greater material comfort and educational opportunity than—" "The minor child has been provided with continuous documented parental presence by Mr. Carter throughout her life," Patricia said, not raising her voice. "The question before the court is not who can offer more in terms of material resources, but who has functioned as this child's consistent parent. That record is unambiguous." Ryan looked at his hands and kept his expression neutral. When they broke an hour later, he and Patricia stepped into the hallway. She adjusted her glasses and said, "They're going to try to depose you. I'll prepare you for that. In the meantime, I want the names of 3 witnesses, people who have seen you with Sophia on a regular basis, teacher, neighbor, someone from the school community." "Mrs. Adiemi," Ryan said immediately. "Sophia's first-grade teacher. She's known us since Sophia was 5. And my downstairs neighbor, a woman named Gloria. She watches Sophia sometimes. School pickups if I'm stuck at work," he thought. "And Danny Park. He's a friend, but he's also seen—" He paused, recalibrating. "He's not a formal character witness." "I'll assess him," Patricia said. "Get me contact info for the first 2, today, if possible." As they turned to go, Olivia appeared at the end of the hallway. She looked at Ryan and something crossed her face, something that wasn't the controlled composure from the conference room, something that was underneath it. Then Faulkner appeared beside her, said something near her ear, and she looked away. Ryan didn't say anything. He turned and walked toward the elevator. In the lobby, Patricia said, "You did well in there. You stayed quiet." "Hard to know what to say," Ryan admitted. "You say nothing until I tell you what to say," she said. "That's the whole job. Are we clear?" "Yeah." "Good." She pushed the lobby door open. "Go pick up your daughter." Well, the witness preparation happened over 2 sessions in Patricia's office across the next 3 weeks. Mrs. Adeyemi, who was 61 and had been teaching first grade for 30 years, and had the bearing of someone who had outlasted a great many bureaucratic systems, agreed without hesitation, and when she sat down in Patricia's office and began describing what she'd observed of Ryan and Sophia over 2 years, she did it with the particular authority of someone who had seen enough families to know the difference between performance and reality. "He comes to every conference," she said, "not just the mandatory ones, the optional sessions, the special events. He asks specific questions, not general questions, specific. What is she struggling with? What is she excelling at? What does she need? He brings documentation sometimes, things she's written at home, questions she's asked him. He is paying attention." She looked at Patricia. "I have had parents in my career who show up in person and still aren't present. Mr. Carter is present." Gloria Reyes from 3C was 73, widowed, and had become something between a neighbor and a grandmother figure over the years. The kind of relationship that develops organically in buildings where people actually know each other, which was less common than it used to be, and which Ryan had always felt quietly grateful for. She told Patricia about the evenings Ryan knocked on her door with Sophia when he was running late from a shift, about the way Sophia talked about her father, about the birthday the year before when Ryan had been 20 minutes late, and Sophia had told Gloria, entirely calmly, that her dad was coming. He was just stuck at work. He always comes. She said it like it was a fact, Gloria told Patricia, like she wasn't worried, like it wasn't even a question. She looked at Ryan, who was sitting in the corner. "That's what you build, that kind of certainty in a child. You can't fake it." Ryan looked at the floor. He was not a person who cried in front of other people as a rule, but that particular moment in Patricia's office required some concentrated effort on his part. The discovery process was less gentle. Faulkner's team submitted their documentation in the 4th week, a comprehensive package that Ryan made himself read in full, alone, one evening after Sophia was asleep. It was, as Patricia had warned, constructed to be true in every specific and damning in aggregate. His income over the previous 3 years, the square footage of the apartment, his work schedule, reconstructed from payroll records and cross-referenced with Sophia's school attendance log in a way that made it clear he'd had to find backup care on a number of occasions. A comparison of local school quality between his neighborhood and the district where Olivia was proposing to settle in San Francisco. It was thorough. And if you read it without any human context, it built a picture of a man doing his absolute best with not enough, which was accurate, but which framed his best as insufficient. He called Patricia. "I've read it," she said. "I know. Is this—" He stopped. "Ryan, I need you to hear me. This package is designed to make you feel like the case is already over. It's not. What they've assembled tells the court what you don't have. My job is to show them what you do have. Those are 2 different stories. And if the judge is going to hear from Mrs. Adeyemi, she's going to hear from Gloria Reyes, she's going to hear from you." Patricia's voice was measured and firm. "And she's going to hear from Olivia Bennett under cross-examination about Sophia. Basic questions. Daily life questions. The kind of questions that only get answered correctly if you were there." She paused. "Were you there, Ryan?" "Every day," he said. "Then let me do my job." He hung up and sat in the quiet apartment with the document package on the coffee table and the bar and the fold-out couch pressing into his lower back, and Sophia's bookshelf organized by distance from Earth, visible in the lamplight from across the room. I thought about what Sophia had said to Gloria. He always comes. He put the documents in the folder Patricia had given him. He set it on the shelf under the coffee table. He lay back on the fold-out couch and looked at the ceiling. 3 years of birthday cards. 6 years of absence measured in photographs sent by email. And now a well-funded legal argument about Sophia's best interests, prepared by people who had never met Sophia and structured by a woman who didn't know her daughter slept on her right side. Ryan closed his eyes. There was a sound from the hallway. Small feet. the soft scuff of socks on hardwood. He opened his eyes. Sophia stood at the end of the hall in her rocket pajamas, hair completely incredible, one eye still mostly closed. She looked at him with the particular vague focus of someone who was three-quarters asleep. "Bad dream?" Ryan asked, keeping his voice low. She shook her head. "Just woke up." A pause. "Can I just sit with you for a minute?" He moved over on the fold-out. She came and climbed up next to him, and they sat there side by side in the dark, her leaning against his arm, both of them looking at nothing much. After a while, her breathing slowed back down into sleep, and Ryan sat still so she wouldn't wake up. He had 2 hearings left. He had Patricia Hollis and Mrs. Adeyemi and Gloria Reyes and a folder of documents and 62 hours a week of his life committed to this child who was currently using his shoulder as a pillow. He had all of that. And somewhere out in the city, he was about to discover he also had something he didn't know about yet. An ally standing in a corner he hadn't thought to look. The call came on a Tuesday evening, 11 days before the final hearing. Ryan was at the kitchen table running through his deposition prep. Patricia had given him a list of 43 questions Faulkner's team was likely to ask, and told him to write out answers longhand, not to memorize them, but to know where his honest answers lived before someone tried to make them sound like something else. Sophia was asleep. The apartment was quiet in the particular way it got after 9, when the street noise dropped and the building settled and it was just Ryan and the lamp and the scratch of his pen. His phone buzzed. Unknown number, San Francisco area code. He almost didn't pick up. He'd been screening calls since the legal process started, tired of the low-grade anxiety that came with not knowing who was on the other end. But something, just the hour maybe, or the particular quality of the third buzz, made him answer. "Ryan Carter?" A woman's voice, clear and unhurried. "Who's calling?" "My name is Charlotte Hayes. I'm the founder of Meridian Capital. That's the company Olivia Bennett runs." A brief pause. "I'd like to meet with you, if you're willing. I think I can help." Ryan put his pen down. He'd heard the name. He'd read it, actually, in the same article where he'd first seen the profile on Olivia's career, a sidebar about Meridian's founding history. Charlotte Hayes had built the company from a 3-person operation 15 years ago into whatever it was now. She was the reason Olivia had a CEO title and a corner office and 2 floors of employees who reported to her. "Why?" he said. "Because I've known about this situation for a while," Charlotte said. "And because I think Olivia is making a significant mistake, and I think an innocent child shouldn't pay for it." She paused again. "I know that sounds calculated. It probably is, a little, but it's also true." Ryan sat very still. I was aware this could be a trap, some strategy Faulkner's team had devised, a way to extract information or manufacture a conflict of interest. He was also aware from somewhere less analytical that the call felt real. "How do you know about Sophia?" he asked. "Olivia talks about her more than she realizes," Charlotte said. "And I've been in this business long enough to know the difference between someone who mentions their child and someone who is carrying their child around with them everywhere they go, even when they don't know it." She stopped. "Can we meet? Somewhere public, if you'd prefer. I'll come to you." He told her he'd call her back in the morning. He hung up and immediately called Patricia. She answered on the second ring, which suggested she was still working, which somehow made him feel better. "Charlotte Hayes," Patricia said, when he'd explained. A pause. "I know the name." "She said she can help." "She might be able to." Patricia's voice was careful. "She might also be working an angle. But here's the thing, Ryan. If Charlotte Hayes is willing to testify to what she's observed of Olivia as a parent, that carries weight. Not because she's powerful, because she's Olivia's employer and the only witness the court is likely to trust as having no particular stake in your favor. She might be setting me up. She might, which is why you're going to let me talk to her first." Patricia met with Charlotte Hayes on Thursday morning at a restaurant in the financial district, the kind of place where 2 professional women having coffee didn't draw any attention. Ryan was at work. Patricia called him at noon. "She's real," Patricia said. "I believe her." "What did she say?" "She said she's been watching Olivia since the petition was filed, and she's not comfortable with the strategy. She thinks Olivia is operating from a place of, her word, guilt, and that the legal offensive is a way of converting guilt into action without actually doing the harder internal work." A pause. She also said that she's heard Olivia describe you, on more than one occasion, in terms that directly contradict the picture her legal team is painting. Ryan was quiet for a moment. Outside the hardware store window, a woman was struggling with a stroller over a cracked section of sidewalk. He watched her navigate it. Is she willing to testify? He asked. Yes, but she has conditions. She doesn't want to be positioned as attacking Olivia. She said she still has to run a company with this woman, and she's not looking to blow up that relationship. She wants to testify to facts, not opinions. What she's observed, what she's heard. That's fine. It's better than fine, Patricia said. Faulkner is going to have a very bad moment when he realizes his client's own boss is on our witness list. Ryan met Charlotte Hayes himself 4 days later at a coffee shop in Hayes Valley. She'd chosen it, he assumed, because the name amused her, and when she shook his hand and said, "I've always liked this neighborhood," with a slight dryness, he decided he liked her immediately, which surprised him. She was in her mid-50s, with silver-streaked hair she didn't seem interested in disguising, and the kind of directness Ryan associated with people who'd been making hard decisions for long enough that the performance of softness no longer seemed worth the effort. She was not what he'd imagined when he thought founder and CEO, which was probably his own limitation. "I want to be honest with you about something," she said, almost before they sat down. "I'm not doing this purely out of altruism. I think Olivia is talented. I also think what she's doing right now is going to hurt her, professionally, personally, in ways she hasn't calculated. And I've learned, over many years, that the best thing you can do for someone you work with is occasionally stop them from walking off a ledge they can't see yet." "So this is about Olivia," Ryan said. "It's about the truth," Charlotte said, "which usually serves everyone better than the alternative, even when it's inconvenient." She wrapped both hands around her cup. "I've heard her talk about Sophia. Not often. She's not a person who broadcasts personal things. But enough. She knows Sophia wants to be an astronaut. She knows she has your tenacity, her words. She knows she reads above her grade level." She stopped. "She also knows she missed it. All of it. I don't think she's faced that fully yet, but I've seen it in the spaces between what she says. She knows." Ryan stared at his cup. "Then why is she doing this?" "Because doing something feels better than sitting with what you've failed to do," Charlotte said, without particular harshness. "And because she's spent her entire professional life solving problems with resources, and she's trying to apply that framework to a situation where it doesn't fit." He thought about that for a moment. "It doesn't change what it is," he said. "For Sophia, for me." "No," Charlotte said. "It doesn't, which is why I'm here." The final hearing was set for a Thursday in December, in a family courtroom on the 7th floor of the Civic Center building. Patricia had been preparing Ryan for 2 weeks. Not just the legal mechanics, but the emotional ones. "You're going to hear things said about you," she told him, "that are framed in ways designed to make you react. Don't react. Faulkner's job in that room is to make you look like someone who can't control himself under pressure. Don't give him the material." Ryan had spent the week before the hearing doing the things he always did: working, cooking dinner, helping with homework, walking Sophia to school through the fog. He told Sophia the hearing was coming. She'd said, "I know," and then gone back to her book, and the normalcy of it had grounded him more than any amount of preparation. The morning of the hearing, he was up at 4:30, which was earlier than usual, but not dramatically, and he made coffee and sat at the kitchen table and went through Patricia's list of questions one more time, not because he'd forgotten any of the answers, but because the ritual of it helped. Sophia appeared at 6, found him at the table, and sat down across from him. "Today?" she asked. "Yeah." She considered. "Are you scared?" "A little." She nodded, like this was a reasonable and acceptable answer. Then she said, "Can we have pancakes instead of eggs? For the important day." Ryan looked at her. "We don't have pancake mix. We have flour and eggs and stuff." "Sophia, I don't know how to make pancakes from scratch. There's a recipe on your phone." She was already sliding off the chair. "I'll find it." They made pancakes, badly. The first 2 were burned on one side and raw on the other, and Sophia declared them prototype pancakes, and ate them anyway with a critical expression that suggested she was cataloging the errors for future improvement. The third batch came out better. Ryan ate standing at the counter and watched her methodically add syrup in a grid pattern across her plate. "Daddy," she said. "Yeah. You know everything about me." He looked at her. You know it, she said, so just say it. All of it. Say everything you know. She stabbed a piece of pancake. That's all you have to do. He stood there in the kitchen at 6:40 in the morning with a cup of coffee going cold in his hand and his daughter eating prototype pancakes in rocket pajamas, and something in his chest that had been wound tight for 2 months loosened just slightly. Yeah, he said. That's right. The courtroom was smaller than he'd imagined from television. Judge Marion Reeves was in her early 60s, with a face that gave away very little. Not cold exactly, but contained, the face of someone who had heard every version of every family story and had long since stopped being surprised by any of them. Ryan sat next to Patricia and tried to breathe normally. Olivia was at the other table. She looked the way she always looked, composed, prepared, put together in every visible way. But Ryan noticed for the first time that she was very slightly sitting forward in her chair and that she'd looked at him when he walked in, which she hadn't done at the preliminary hearing. Faulkner opened. He was good. Ryan had to give him that. He built the picture efficiently and without apparent malice, framing everything in the language of opportunity and aspiration and the future of a bright child. He talked about Olivia's achievements, her resources, her commitment to being present going forward. He talked about stability in terms of income and housing and educational access and the documented limitations of Ryan's current circumstances. When he used the phrase Sophia deserves more than circumstances can provide, Ryan looked at the table and kept his face blank, the way Patricia had told him to. Patricia's opening was shorter. She established the basic facts. 6 years of continuous primary custody, documented and consistent, supported by the testimony of educators and community members who had observed Ryan and Sophia directly. She used the word present 4 times. She did not argue against Olivia's financial capacity. She argued that the question before the court was not which parent had more to offer materially, but which parent had been there. The first witness was Mrs. Adeyemi. She was remarkable. Ryan had expected her to be good. She was a 61-year-old woman who had spent 3 decades managing classrooms and parent-teacher conferences and had a natural authority that required no amplification. But watching her on the stand, watching her answer Patricia's questions with the specific, unhurried precision of someone reporting observations she had made carefully and trusted completely, he felt something he hadn't quite expected, gratitude so sharp it was almost painful. Describe Mr. Carter's engagement with Sophia's education as you've observed it, Patricia said. He comes to every scheduled conference and most of the unscheduled ones, Mrs. Adeyemi said. When Sophia was struggling with reading fluency in the first semester, briefly, she resolved it quickly. He came in on a Tuesday morning before school started to ask me what he could do at home. Not what the school could do. What he could do. He spent 3 weeks doing supplementary work with her every evening. The problem resolved. She paused. He also knows what she's interested in. He doesn't just know she likes space. He knows which specific aspects, what she's currently reading, what questions she's working on. That comes from conversations. Many, many conversations. In your professional experience, what does that level of engagement indicate? It indicates a parent who treats their child as a person, Mrs. Adeyemi said. Not a project. A person. Faulkner's cross-examination tried to establish that enthusiasm wasn't the same as capacity, that a loving but financially strained environment could still limit a child's potential. Mrs. Adeyemi listened to the question and then said, with the patience of someone who has heard a great many arguments and identified the weak ones, in 30 years of teaching, I have never seen a child limited by a loving home. I have seen children limited by a home where they weren't the priority. Sophia Carter has always been her father's priority. Faulkner thanked her and sat down. Gloria Reyes was next. She was shorter and less formal than Mrs. Adeyemi, and her testimony was less structured, but Ryan thought just as effective, because it was entirely domestic, entirely specific, entirely about the texture of ordinary days. She talked about the evenings Ryan knocked on her door, about the routine she'd witnessed, about the year Sophia had a respiratory infection, and Ryan had taken 4 days off work without complaint, and then immediately worked double shifts the following week to cover the loss. Did you ever have concerns about Sophia's welfare and Mr. Carter's care? Patricia asked. Never, Gloria said simply. Did Sophia ever express fear or anxiety about her home environment? She expressed anxiety one time, Gloria said. When Ryan was late for pickup, maybe 20 minutes, she was worried about him. She paused. Not about herself. About him. A child worries about the parent they're attached to. Ryan looked at the table again. When Olivia took the stand, the temperature in the room changed in a way that was subtle but real. She was prepared. Obviously prepared. The kind of prepared that had a professional behind it. She answered the biographical questions smoothly, talked about her career and her resources and her current home in Pacific Heights, and the schools she'd identified, the plans she'd developed. Patricia let her finish. Then she stood up and opened her notepad. Ms. Bennett, what time does Sophia go to sleep? A brief pause. I'm not certain of the exact. Approximate is fine. Around 8, I'd imagine. Which side of the bed does she sleep on? A longer pause. I don't know. Does she have food preferences, dislikes? She's 7. Most children. Does she have a best friend? Olivia stopped. In the pause, something passed across her face. I don't know her best friend's name. Does she have a recurring theme in her dreams that she talks to her father about? Faulkner stood. Objection. Relevance. Your Honor, Patricia said, the petitioner has argued that she is better positioned to meet this child's needs going forward. I'm establishing whether she currently knows what those needs are. Judge Reeves looked at Faulkner. Overruled. Answer the question, Ms. Bennett. Olivia looked straight ahead. Her jaw was set, the controlled composure doing most of the work. No, she said. I don't know. Mr. Carter, Patricia said, turning briefly toward Ryan's table. Would you be able to answer these questions? Objection. Withdrawn, Patricia said. She didn't need the answer. It was already in the room. She asked 4 more questions. What was the title of the book Sophia was currently reading? What career did Sophia intend to pursue? Whether Sophia had any fears related to the dark. What games Sophia and her father played on Saturdays when the weather was bad. Olivia answered 2 of them partially and couldn't answer the other 2 at all. The courtroom was very quiet. Ryan watched Olivia on the stand during that silence and saw something he hadn't expected to see. Not the controlled professional he'd met at the coffee shop, not the woman with the lawyers and the plan. He saw something that looked like a person who had just been made to look at something they'd been successfully avoiding for a long time. It didn't make him feel satisfied. It mostly made him feel tired. Charlotte Hayes took the stand in the afternoon. She was sworn in with the matter-of-fact composure of someone who had given depositions before and regarded legal proceedings as a practical inconvenience rather than an ordeal. Patricia kept her testimony focused. Have you had occasion to hear Ms. Bennett speak about her daughter? Yes, several times over the past 2 years. What did those conversations indicate about Ms. Bennett's knowledge of her daughter? That she has some, Charlotte said, without apparent judgment. She knows Sophia wants to be an astronaut. She mentioned it to me once when we were discussing a hiring event we were sponsoring. She said something like, my daughter would love this, she wants to work in space. I thought it was a touching detail. She paused. She also told me in a different conversation that Sophia had Ryan's stubbornness. She said it in a way that suggested she admired it. Did Ms. Bennett ever indicate any concerns about Sophia's welfare and Mr. Carter's care? No, never. Did she ever indicate that she believed Mr. Carter was failing Sophia in any material way? No, Charlotte said. What she indicated, on the occasion she mentioned it at all, was that she missed being part of her daughter's life, and that she knew it was her own doing. Faulkner objected. Judge Reeves allowed the testimony. Charlotte left the stand and walked past Olivia's table without looking at her. Olivia was looking at the front of the courtroom, her profile still and fixed. Ryan watched her for a moment. Then Patricia leaned over and said quietly, You're next. He'd been dreading this part. Not because he was afraid of what he'd say. Sophia had been right about that. He did know everything. The knowing wasn't the problem. But because he'd spent his entire adult life keeping the hard things private, and now he was being asked to put all of it in a fluorescent-lit room for strangers to evaluate. He took the stand. Patricia walked him through it methodically. The timeline, the arrangement, the daily realities of the past 6 years. He answered her questions in the plain, specific way he'd practiced, without embellishment, without editorializing. He talked about Sophia's school and her teachers and her best friend Priya, and the ongoing dog versus cat debate, and the space books organized by distance from Earth. When Faulkner stood for cross, Ryan made himself very still. Mr. Carter, Isn't it true that you work in excess of 60 hours per week? Around that, yes. And during those hours, Sophia's in the care of a neighbor or a school? During school hours, school. After school hours, Gloria Reyes occasionally, or my sister. So a significant portion of Sophia's waking hours are spent without you present. A portion, yes. I'd call it, that's a yes? Patricia stayed seated. Ryan breathed. Yes, he said. I work. To pay for the apartment she lives in, and the food she eats, and the books she reads, and the school she attends. I work because that's what her life costs. That's not an absence. That's the reason she has a life. Faulkner paused. Then, your apartment is approximately 540 square feet. Yes. And Sophia sleeps in the only bedroom. Yes. And you sleep on a pull-out couch. Yes. Faulkner let the silence do the work. Ryan looked at him. She has a bedroom, Ryan said. I decided she should have the bedroom because she's 7 and she needed her own space. I took the couch because I'm an adult who can sleep on a couch. He paused. That's not deprivation. That's parenting. He heard something from the gallery. The faintest sound, the kind that courtrooms try to suppress. Judge Reeves glanced up briefly. Faulkner asked 2 more questions, got 2 more plain answers, and sat down. Ryan stepped down from the stand and walked back to his seat and put his hands flat on the table because they were shaking slightly, which he hadn't been able to prevent, and he was aware that nobody could see that from where they were sitting. Patricia put a hand briefly on his forearm, just briefly. Then she started shuffling her papers for closing arguments. Across the room, Olivia's attorney was leaning close to her, speaking in a low voice. Olivia was looking at Ryan. When he noticed, she didn't look away. And in her face, for the second time that day, he saw something underneath the composure. Not triumph, not strategy. Something older and harder. Something that looked, if he was being honest with himself, like grief. He looked away first. Outside the tall windows of the courtroom, the December sky was going dark. Somewhere across the city, a woman named Gloria was picking up Sophia from school, and they were probably arguing about whether dogs were objectively better than cats, and Sophia was probably winning. Judge Reeves called a recess and said she would hear closing arguments at 9 the following morning. Ryan put on his jacket. He had 1 night left before he found out whether his daughter was going to grow up with him. I didn't sleep. He tried. He pulled out the fold-out, found the position around the bar, turned off the lamp, and lay there in the dark for a while doing the breathing exercise his doctor had recommended 2 years ago, when Ryan had shown up at a routine checkup with a resting heart rate that suggested he was either running from something or about to start. The breathing helped, marginally, the way most reasonable advice helps when the thing you're actually dealing with is not a medical problem, but a human one. Around midnight, he gave up and made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with the lamp on low and looked at the deposition prep notes Patricia had given him, not because he needed to review them. Closing arguments weren't his to deliver, but because having paper in front of him gave his hand something to do. He read through the case notes she'd compiled. He read through Mrs. Adiemi's witness statement and Gloria's, and he read his own deposition answers, and somewhere around the 3rd reading, he became aware that he was not actually absorbing any of it, but simply moving his eyes over words as a way of avoiding the inside of his own head. He put the papers away. He thought about the courtroom, about Olivia on the stand, the moment between the 2nd and 3rd answer she couldn't give, the thing he'd seen cross her face. He thought about what Charlotte had said at the coffee shop, guilt converted into action without the harder internal work, and turned it over, looking at it from different angles the way you do with something you suspect is true but aren't ready to fully accept. It didn't change anything. He knew that. Olivia's reasons for doing what she was doing were her own architecture to deal with. But somewhere in the quiet of the apartment at 1 in the morning, it occurred to him that the opposite of love wasn't indifference. Sometimes it was just fear, dressed up in a lawsuit. He wasn't sure what to do with that thought, so he set it aside. At 2:15, Sophia appeared. She didn't say anything this time. She just came down the hall and climbed up next to him at the kitchen table, still half asleep, and leaned against his arm. Ryan shifted to accommodate her weight. She looked at the papers on the table without apparent curiosity. Can't sleep either? Ryan asked, keeping his voice low. Just woke up. A pause. You have coffee. You're 7. I know, I'm just noting you have coffee. They sat there for a while. The building was quiet around them, the street outside mostly still, just the occasional car passing and the soft percussion of the city at 2 in the morning, distant and muffled, like sounds from another world. "Daddy," Sophia said. "Yeah. What's the judge like?" He thought about Marion Reeves, the contained face, the careful attention, the way she'd looked over her glasses when Faulkner objected to the dream question. "Hard to read," he said honestly. "Smart, pays attention." "Is that good?" "Yeah, I think so." Sophia was quiet for a moment. Then, "When I'm an astronaut, I'll have to make decisions other people are depending on, like the whole crew." "That's true. I've been thinking about how you do that." She rubbed her eye. "How you make a decision when everything matters." "What did you figure out?" "You figure out what you already know," she said. "You know things before you think you know them. You just have to stop the other stuff and listen to what you already know." Ryan looked at her. She was 7 years old and she was telling him things he'd been unable to articulate at 32, which was not actually surprising given who she was and how she thought, but which still hit him somewhere specific. "When'd you get so smart?" he said. She shrugged. "I read a lot." He put his arm around her. She relaxed against him in the way she'd been relaxing against him since she was small enough to carry everywhere. The full and absolute trust of it, unchanged by everything the years had brought. "Go back to sleep," he said. "In a minute." "Sophia." "1 minute," she said firmly. He let her have the minute. Then he walked her back to her room and waited until her breathing went slow and even, and then he went back to the kitchen table and sat there until the sky started going gray outside the window. Patricia was already in the courtroom when Ryan arrived at 8:45, talking to a clerk and making notes on her legal pad with the focused efficiency she brought to everything. She looked up when he came in, assessed him quickly, and said, "Did you sleep?" "Some." She accepted this without comment. Faulkner is going to lead with the financial argument again in closing. He'll use the phrase best interests approximately 9 times. I've been counting. She turned a page. "I'm going to close with testimony. Your testimony, Mrs. Adeyemi's, Gloria's, the specifics. I want the judge thinking about what Sophia actually knows and what you actually know about her when she makes her decision." "Okay." "You're going to sit there and look like a man who got a reasonable amount of sleep and is completely confident in the outcome." She paused. "Can you do that?" Ryan straightened his jacket. "I'll do my best." "That's all I've ever asked," Patricia said, and turned back to her notes. Olivia arrived 2 minutes later with Faulkner and the note-taking woman and a second attorney Ryan didn't recognize who had been absent from the previous session. She didn't look at Ryan when she sat down. She set a leather folder on the table and opened it and began reading something inside it, and Ryan noticed, from across the room, without meaning to notice, that she'd had the folder in her hands the whole way in. She'd been reading it outside. In the elevator, maybe. The hall. Faulkner delivered his closing argument with the professionalism Ryan had come to expect. Clean, well-paced, persuasive in the way that well-constructed arguments are persuasive when they're built on foundations that feel solid until someone points out what they're missing. He talked about Sophia's future, about windows of developmental opportunity that were, in his framing, already narrowing. He talked about what Olivia's resources could provide. The school in Pacific Heights that ranked in the top 5% for college placement. The after-school programs, the private tutoring, the enrichment. The word enrichment used 4 times, Ryan counted. He talked about Ryan with a careful respect that was somehow harder to sit through than straightforward criticism would have been. He acknowledged the dedication. He acknowledged the love. He then used the word limitations 3 times in rapid succession and let the implication accumulate without having to state it directly. "This court has the opportunity," Faulkner said, near the end, "to give Sophia Carter the future she deserves, one that matches her potential, one that her father, with the greatest of hearts and the best of intentions, is simply not positioned to provide." He sat down. The courtroom was quiet for a moment. Then Patricia stood up. She didn't use notes. She told Ryan she wasn't going to use notes for closing, that she wanted to be looking at the judge rather than a page, and she stood at the front of the courtroom and spoke to Marion Reeves directly. "Your Honor, the petitioner has argued that Sophia Carter needs more than her father can provide. More material resources, more space, more opportunity." The word "more" has appeared throughout this proceeding as though it were a legal standard, as though sufficiency were a dollar figure you could attach, and a shortage you could remedy by transferring custody. She paused. The word that has not appeared in the petitioner's argument, despite its centrality to every piece of testimony this court has heard, is presence. Mr. Carter has been present, every day, for 6 years. Through illness and financial strain and long hours and the kind of accumulated exhaustion that doesn't show up in financial disclosures. He has been present for the homework and the nightmares and the questions about space and the arguments about dogs versus cats and the prototype pancakes on hard mornings and every single other thing that constitutes a childhood. Not as a performance, not as a calculation, as a fact. She took a step toward the bench. Mrs. Adeyemi told this court that Sophia Carter's father treats his daughter as a person, not a project. Gloria Reyes told this court that when Sophia was left waiting 20 minutes for pickup, she expressed worry, not for herself, but for him, for her father. Because that is the nature of the bond they've built. She paused. And Ms. Bennett, on the stand, could not tell this court the title of the book Sophia is currently reading, could not name Sophia's best friend, could not say which side of the bed her daughter sleeps on. Ryan looked at the table. This court is not being asked to judge Ms. Bennett's character or punish her for the choices she made 6 years ago. What it is being asked to do is determine what serves Sophia Carter's actual welfare. Not the welfare of a hypothetical child with different circumstances, but this child, the one who reads above her grade level and wants to fix the mold problem on the International Space Station and organizes her bookshelves by distance from Earth, and knows, absolutely and without question, that her father is coming. He always comes. She let that sit for a moment. Mr. Carter has given Sophia something no resource can purchase and no court order can manufacture. He has given her the certainty that she is someone's entire reason. That is not a limitation. That is the foundation on which children build themselves. And this court should let him finish what he started. She sat down. Judge Reeves made a note. Her face gave away nothing. She thanked both counsels and said she would return her ruling by end of business that day, which Patricia had told Ryan was fast, faster than expected, and which Patricia explained in a quiet voice afterward as meaning that the judge had heard enough. Whether that was good or bad, Ryan couldn't tell. They waited in the hall while the clerks processed the paperwork from the session. Ryan sat on a wooden bench against the wall with his hands clasped between his knees. Patricia sat beside him, checking her phone. Down the hall, near the elevator bank, Faulkner and Olivia were talking. He couldn't hear them. He wasn't trying to. At one point, Olivia looked up from the conversation and found Ryan across the distance of the hallway. He didn't look away this time, and neither did she. And there was a second or two of just two people looking at each other across a corridor with everything that needed to be said between them hovering in the air, unsaid, probably permanently. Then Faulkner said something and she looked back. Ryan looked at his hands. "You okay?" Patricia asked, not looking up from her phone. "Yeah." He paused. "She looked different today." "In court?" "In the hall just now." Patricia glanced up briefly in Olivia's direction, then back to her phone. People look different when they've heard out loud what they already knew internally. Ryan thought about that. Then he said, "What do you think the judge is going to do?" Patricia put her phone away and looked at him with the direct, undecorated honesty he'd come to expect from her, the quality he'd hired her for. "I think she heard two things in that courtroom," she said. "She heard a very good argument for resources, and she heard 6 years of consistent evidence about what this child's life actually looks like." She paused. "In my experience, when those two things compete, the evidence wins. Not always, but usually." "Usually," Ryan said. "I'm not going to tell you it's a certainty," she said. "I've been practicing for 22 years, and I know better than to say that. But I believe in this case. I believed in it when you first walked into my office, and I believe in it more now." She looked at him straight. "Go home. Be with Sophia. I'll call you when I hear." He picked Sophia up from school at 3:15, the usual time, Clement Street and the fog doing its usual thing. She ran out through the school doors and found him at the gate and said, "Priya said fish are actually interesting. She's changing her whole position on fish, as though this were the most pressing development of the day." "How'd that happen?" Ryan asked, falling into step beside her. "Her family got one, a betta fish named Copernicus." She considered this as they walked. "I still think dogs are better, but I'm open to being wrong about fish." "That's very mature of you." "I know. She hopped over a crack in the sidewalk. How'd it go today? He told her the closing arguments were today. She'd absorbed the information and not asked many questions, which was her way of giving him space to handle things she understood were his to handle. Good, I think, he said. We're waiting for the judge. When? Today, probably, maybe tomorrow. She nodded. They walked for half the block in silence. Then, Daddy, if it goes wrong, it's not going to go wrong. But if it does, she said, with the specific persistence she applied to hypotheticals. She needed to understand fully before she could set them down. What happens? Ryan thought about how to answer this. He'd thought about it before, in the sleepless hours, in the quiet between shifts, the actual sequence of events if the ruling went the other way. Patricia had told him there were appeals. There were options. It was not, legally speaking, a binary and final outcome. But standing on Clement Street with his daughter beside him, that wasn't the answer that came out. I fight, he said. I fight every step of every process until there are no more steps left. And then I find new steps. He looked at her. You're not going anywhere you don't choose to go, not while I have anything to say about it. She looked at him for a moment with the evaluating look, the older-than-7 calculation behind her eyes. Then she nodded. Okay, she said. I believe you. They got home. Ryan made dinner. Pasta. Nothing complicated. He didn't have the bandwidth for complicated. Sophia sat at the kitchen table doing homework, working through a math worksheet with the focused irritation she brought to anything she considered beneath her cognitive ambitions, but which was required anyway. Ryan moved around the kitchen listening to her mutter under her breath about multiplication being already obvious, and felt, despite everything, something that was genuinely close to ordinary. His phone rang at 5:47. Patricia. He set down the pot he was holding and stepped into the hallway, out of Sophia's sightline. The ruling's in, Patricia said. Her voice was level, which told him nothing. She was always level. And? Ryan. A pause. Not long, maybe 2 seconds, but enough that his heart did something complicated. You retain full custody. The judge ruled in your favor. Olivia is granted structured visitation rights, supervised initially, transitioning to standard if she maintains consistency over 12 months, and the court's written ruling specifically cites the quality and continuity of your parenting as the determining factor. He stood in the hallway with his back against the wall and one hand pressed flat to the plaster. Ryan? Yeah, he said. His voice came out rougher than he expected. Yeah, I'm here. You did it, Patricia said. You and Sophia did it. I just provided the frame. He didn't say anything for a moment. From the kitchen, he could hear Sophia's pen on paper and the small sounds of her working, the ordinary music of an ordinary Tuesday evening in their apartment on Clement Street. Thank you, he said, and meant it in a way that the word didn't fully carry. Don't thank me, Patricia said. Go tell her. He hung up. He stood in the hallway for another moment, letting it settle. The weight of the past 2 months, the fear and the sleepless nights, and the fold-out couch, and the letter, and the courtroom, and all of it, settling into its place in the story. Then he went back to the kitchen. Sophia looked up from her worksheet. She read his face the way she read most things, quickly and accurately, and without much need for translation. We won, she said. We won. She looked at him for a second, then she looked back down at her worksheet. Okay, she said. Good. She wrote something down. Then, without looking up, can we celebrate with ice cream? Ryan leaned against the kitchen counter. The pot on the stove was starting to boil over, and he didn't move to fix it immediately. Yeah, he said. We can do ice cream. After dinner. After dinner. She nodded, satisfied, and went back to her multiplication. Ryan turned to fix the pot. His hands were still not entirely steady, but they were getting there. Outside the window, the December fog had come all the way in, thick and complete, softening the streetlights into blurs of gold. Somewhere in the city, a ruling had been filed and Olivia Bennett was reading it, and whatever that moment was for her was hers to navigate. Here, on the 4th floor of a building on Clement Street, pasta was boiling and a 7-year-old was doing multiplication homework, and a man who hadn't slept properly in 2 months was standing at a stove holding a wooden spoon and feeling something he was going to need another day or two to name. Not triumph, exactly. Not relief, though that was part of it. Something quieter. Something that felt like, finally, after so long, unambiguously, simply, enough. Charlotte Hayes called the following morning. Ryan was at the hardware store when his phone buzzed, and he stepped outside for the call, standing on the sidewalk with his breath showing in the cold. I heard, Charlotte said. Yeah. I'm glad. A pause. I want to talk to you about something else, if you're open to it. A different kind of conversation. Ryan shifted his weight. What kind? The kind where I offer you a job, Charlotte said. A real one. Not a favor. I need someone, and I think you're someone worth having. She let that land. I'd like you to come in and talk to me, this week if you can. He stood on the sidewalk in the cold outside Dylan's hardware and looked up at the gray December sky. Why? He asked. Because I've watched how you handle pressure, Charlotte said. Because I've watched what it looks like when someone is genuinely committed rather than just competent. Those are not the same thing, and the second one I can train for, but the first one I cannot. She paused. And because you've been working 60-hour weeks doing jobs that don't use most of what you have, and that seems like a waste. Ryan was quiet for a moment. The street hummed around him, a bus going past, the distant sound of a car alarm that someone was ignoring. I'll come in, he said. He went back inside. Frank was behind her, pretending to be interested in a display of caulk guns. He looked up when Ryan came in with the specific neutral expression of a man who had definitely not been watching through the window. Everything okay? Frank said. Ryan thought about Sophia at the kitchen table last night, eating ice cream out of a bowl and explaining to him at length why the sleeping pod design on the ISS was ergonomically inefficient. He thought about the ruling. I thought about Charlotte Hayes on the phone just now, and what it might mean to finally be able to afford a 2-bedroom apartment and health insurance that didn't have a $2,000 deductible. Yeah, he said. Frank, I need to talk to you about something. I think I might be leaving. Frank nodded slowly, the nod of a man who'd seen this coming for a while and had made his peace with it. The hardware business's loss, he said. Then, when? I don't know yet, Ryan said honestly, but I wanted to tell you first. Frank put down the caulk gun he'd been using as a prop. You've been a good employee, Ryan. Whatever comes next, you're going to be fine. He said it in the blunt, undecorated way of a 63-year-old man who had no interest in sentimentality, but occasionally said true things. Tell that daughter of yours she should come by sometime before you go. I've got a book about rockets I've been meaning to give her. Ryan blinked. You have a book about rockets? My grandson left it here. He's moved on to baseball. Frank shrugged. Girl should have it. Ryan stood at the counter for a second, in the hardware store that smelled of sawdust and machine oil, in the city that had held him and ground him down and refused to let him go, and felt the particular texture of a life that was about to change in ways he hadn't earned by being lucky, but by holding on. I'll bring her in, he said. He went back to work. The job offer from Charlotte Hayes was not a favor dressed up as an opportunity. Ryan understood this within the first 10 minutes of sitting across from her in the Meridian Capital offices on the 14th floor of a building in the financial district, looking out at a view of the bay that he'd never had occasion to see from this angle before. Charlotte had laid it out plainly, the way she laid out everything. Operations manager for Meridian's facilities and vendor partnerships division, a role that had been filled by 3 different people in 4 years, each of whom had been technically competent and organizationally disastrous because, as Charlotte put it, they could manage a spreadsheet and couldn't manage a human being, and this job is 90% human beings. The salary was more than Ryan had made in the previous 2 years combined. He sat with that fact for a moment after she said the number, keeping his face neutral, the same way he'd kept his face neutral in the courtroom. Charlotte watched him with the particular patience of someone who understood that a man who had been earning hardware store wages for over a year needed a moment to adjust to a different set of numbers. I'm not a businessman, Ryan said. I don't have a degree. I left school after 2 years because... He stopped. I have a hardware store background in moving work and about 14 months of logistics improvisation. I know your background, Charlotte said. I looked into it before I called you. She leaned forward slightly. You've been running a household on an income that most people couldn't run a household on, while maintaining a child's education and well-being and fighting a legal battle and keeping your head together through all of it. That is operational management. The industry context is different. The skills are the same. I'd need to learn a lot. Everyone needs to learn a lot when they take a new job. People who tell you otherwise are either lying or not growing. She sat back. I'm not asking you to show up fully formed. I'm asking you to show up consistently with the kind of judgment I watched you exercise over the past 2 months. She paused. Can you do that? Ryan looked at her. He thought about Sophia eating ice cream after the ruling, explaining the ISS sleeping pod problem with a fork. He thought about the fold-out couch bar. He thought about what a 2-bedroom apartment and a non-catastrophic health insurance plan would mean in practical daily terms for the life he was trying to build. Yes, he said. Charlotte extended her hand. You start the second Monday of January. HR will send paperwork tomorrow. He shook her hand. Then he rode the elevator down 14 floors and walked out onto the street and stood on the sidewalk for a minute, not going anywhere, just standing in the December air with the city moving around him, feeling the specific vertigo of something actually changing. He called Diane on the way to his car. She answered on the first ring. Something happened, he said. Good something or good? A pause. Then she said, in the voice she used when she was emotional and refusing to let it show fully, Tell me. He told her. When he finished, there was a longer pause, and he could hear her breathing on the other end, and then she said, Ryan, I need you to let me say something without you telling me you don't need anything. He waited. I'm proud of you, she said. I have been for a while. I just wanted you to hear it out loud. He stood by his car and looked at the street and felt the words settle somewhere they'd needed to settle for a long time. Not because he'd been waiting for validation. That wasn't it. But because Diane had been standing behind him through every bad year, quietly, without making it a production, and hearing her say it out loud felt like finally being able to look back at the road you'd traveled and recognize the distance. I know, he said. Thank you. Don't thank me. Go get your kid. He got his kid. January arrived with the specific determination that January has in San Francisco, not the brutal cold of the interior of the country, but a gray, persistent chill that got into everything and made the warmth of inside places feel genuinely earned. Ryan's last day at Dylan's was a Friday, and Frank gave him the rocket book for Sophia, wrapped in newspaper because Frank was not a man who maintained a supply of gift wrap, and shook his hand with the firm brevity of someone expressing something real in as few physical gestures as possible. You were always better than the job, Frank said. The job kept the lights on for a year and a half, Ryan said. That's what jobs are for. Frank picked up a receipt and studied it like it had become suddenly interesting. Doors open if the fancy office doesn't work out. Ryan drove home with the newspaper-wrapped book on the passenger seat and the particular feeling of an era ending that wasn't sad, exactly. It was just the texture of change, the slight dislocation of a door closing on something you'd survived. He gave Sophia the book that night. She unwrapped it carefully, looked at the cover, and then looked up at him with the expression she got when something genuinely surprised her. Not a performance of surprise, but the real thing, when the world delivered something she hadn't anticipated. Mr. Frank had this? His grandson left it. She turned it over, read the back. This is the advanced one, she said, with clear approval. The one for people who are serious about it. Well, Ryan said, Frank figured you were serious. She looked at the book for another moment. Then she said, I want to send him a thank you note, a real one, not an email. Ryan thought about Frank's face reading a handwritten thank you note from a 7-year-old future astronaut. Yeah, he said, let's do that. She wrote it that evening at the kitchen table, in her careful, slightly oversized handwriting, and illustrated the bottom with a drawing of a rocket that was objectively better than most adults could manage. Ryan read it when she was done. Dear Mr. Frank, thank you for the book. I'm going to read it very carefully. I'm going to be an astronaut when I'm grown up and fix the mold on the ISS and also improve the sleeping pods. Your book will help me understand the science better. Sophia Carter, age 7. And put it in an envelope and wrote Frank's address on it and thought, not for the first time, that whatever he'd done right over the past 7 years had produced a person he genuinely liked. The new job was hard, in the way new things are hard, not beyond him but demanding, requiring him to operate in unfamiliar territory with unfamiliar tools while simultaneously proving that Charlotte's assessment of him had been correct. He made mistakes in the first month. Some of them were technical, learning systems he hadn't used before, navigating corporate processes that bore no resemblance to anything in his previous work life. Some were social, misjudging the dynamics of teams that had been operating long before he arrived, and had existing loyalties and informal hierarchies he had to learn to read. He was honest about the mistakes. That was the approach he'd settled on, partly out of temperament and partly out of calculation. He'd watched enough situations to know that the people who tried to hide their errors compounded them, while the people who named them and fixed them moved faster. He came to Charlotte in the third week and told her he'd mismanaged a vendor negotiation and laid out exactly what had gone wrong and what he was going to do to correct it. She listened and then said, "What would you do differently?" He told her. "Then do that," she said. The correction worked. The vendor came back. The negotiation was reopened on better terms, and the two people on his team who'd watched the whole thing, a woman named Keisha, who'd been at Meridian for 6 years, and a man named Tomas, who was younger than Ryan and significantly more technically sophisticated, treated him differently afterward. Not with more deference, but with more trust, which was worth more than deference, and which Ryan recognized as the thing Charlotte had been trying to tell him he could earn. He was good at the job, not immediately and not without effort, but genuinely good in the ways that mattered, managing the people well, keeping the moving parts communicating, solving problems that were fundamentally about human beings not being on the same page and required someone to read everyone in the room and find the path through. He'd been doing versions of that his whole adult life. The context was different, the core skill was the same. By March, he was steady in the role. By April, Charlotte gave him an additional portfolio and a small raise without being asked, which she mentioned in a Tuesday meeting so briefly it was almost a footnote. He called Diane that evening and she said, "I told you," and he said, "You did." And there was a warmth in it that was the warmth of being known. The apartment on Clement Street ended in April. He'd found the new place in late February, a 2-bedroom in the Richmond 3rd floor, a building that was older but well kept, with a landlord who was the sort of person who returned calls within 48 hours, which Ryan had come to understand was a higher bar than it sounded. The bedrooms were actual rooms, both of them, with real closets and windows that faced west. The kitchen was big enough for 2 people to stand in without touching. There was no yard, but there was a small balcony off the living room that Sophia immediately identified as a potential location for a telescope. He and Sophia packed the Clement Street apartment together on a Saturday, which took most of the day and involved the discovery of a significant number of items whose origins neither of them could account for. Sophia was systematic about her books, wrapping each one individually in newspaper the way Ryan had shown her, stacking them with the spines showing in the boxes so she could find them at the other end. She was less systematic about everything else, which involved a great deal of starting to pack something, getting distracted by a memory associated with the thing, and then telling Ryan the memory in considerable detail while the packing stalled. They stopped for lunch on the floor, eating sandwiches surrounded by half-packed boxes, and Sophia looked around the nearly empty living room with an expression Ryan couldn't immediately read. "Are you sad?" he asked. She thought about it. A little, but not a lot. She took a bite of her sandwich. It was a good apartment. It was a small apartment. It was still good. She looked at the wall where her bookshelf had been, the faint outline of lighter paint where it had stood for 3 years. We had a good life here. Ryan looked at the room, at the pull-out couch frame, folded up and waiting for the moving truck, at the indentation in the carpet where the coffee table had been. 3 years of early mornings and late nights and long walks to school and rocket pajamas and space books and prototype pancakes. 3 years of a life that had been genuinely hard and genuinely his. "Yeah," he said. "We did." Sophia finished her sandwich. Then she said, "Can the new room be painted? I want a color." "What color?" She thought. "Dark blue. Like space." "We'll have to ask the landlord." "But if he says yes?" "Then dark blue," Ryan said. She nodded, satisfied, and went back to wrapping books. The new landlord, when asked, said yes to dark blue, provided Ryan did the painting himself and used a decent primer. Ryan and Sophia painted Sophia's room on a Sunday 3 weeks after they moved in, which involved more paint on both of them than on the walls for the first hour, and which ended with a room that was, Ryan had to admit, exactly the right shade, deep and dark and genuinely space-like, The kind of color that made the white stars Sophia had insisted on sticking to the ceiling look real in the lamplight. She stood in the middle of the room when it was done, her hair paint-flecked, looking up at the ceiling. "This is it," she said. "The room?" "My room." She said it with a completeness, a finality that meant something more than the words. "This is mine. This is where I live. This is real." Ryan stood in the doorway and let her have the moment. Olivia called in February, 2 months after the ruling. Ryan almost didn't pick up, and then picked up because not picking up was a form of prolonging something that needed to be dealt with directly. She was calling about the visitation schedule. The court had set parameters, but the practical implementation was between them, and Patricia had told Ryan that courts preferred parents who arranged these things cooperatively to ones who required judicial micromanagement of every detail. The call was awkward in the specific way that calls between people who have too much history and insufficient current relationship are awkward. Olivia was formal without being cold. Ryan was civil without being warm. They agreed on a Saturday afternoon, supervised by Diane in a neutral location. A park they both knew, near a cafe where Diane could sit and pretend to read. He didn't tell Sophia much beforehand. He told her that her mom wanted to spend some time with her, and that it was Sophia's choice how she felt about it, and that he would be right there and she could leave whenever she wanted. Sophia had processed this for approximately 90 seconds, and then said, "Okay, but I want to pick the park." She picked the park. She went on a Saturday afternoon in February wearing her good jacket and carrying a book, which Ryan understood as both a comfort object and a conversational escape hatch. If things got difficult, the book was available. He waited with Diane at the cafe. Diane read an actual book and did not pretend to. Ryan drank 3 cups of coffee and looked at his phone without seeing it, and tried not to watch the park bench where Olivia and Sophia were sitting from across the distance. After an hour and 40 minutes, Sophia appeared at the cafe door. He looked at her face. It was the face of someone who had experienced something complicated and was processing it with the thoroughness she applied to everything. "How was it?" he asked. She sat down across from him. "She knows I want to be an astronaut," she said. "She asked me about it. She had questions." "Good questions?" "Some of them." She paused. "She didn't know about the mold problem. I told her." "What did she say?" "She said she didn't know the ISS had a mold problem, and she seemed actually interested, not just pretend interested." Sophia looked at her hands. She's not like you. She doesn't know everything about me." "But she was trying." Ryan looked at his daughter. "Is that enough? For now?" Sophia thought about it with real care. "I don't know yet," she said honestly, "but I think I want to find out." He nodded. He didn't say anything else because she hadn't asked for commentary. She'd answered his question and was done with it for the day, and that was the right amount to process in a single afternoon. He ordered her a hot chocolate, and they sat with Diane and talked about other things, until the February light went flat and they drove home. The visits continued. Once a month in February, twice in March, weekly by June. Ryan didn't ask Sophia to report on them, and she didn't report unless she wanted to, which she sometimes did. The reports were neither uniformly positive nor dramatically negative. They were the incremental, fumbling narrative of 2 people trying to build something from almost nothing, which was slow and imperfect, and occasionally took 3 steps forward and 1 step back. He didn't watch the visits. He trusted Diane for the supervised ones, and by May the supervision requirement had been reviewed and relaxed to recommended presence, and by June the court was satisfied with the arrangement. He didn't discuss Olivia with Sophia beyond what Sophia brought to him. He had opinions. He had years of opinions, carefully accumulated and stored. He kept them where they were, because Sophia didn't need his opinions about her mother. She needed the space to form her own, which she was doing steadily and on her own terms, the way she did everything. But in March, Ryan enrolled in the evening program at San Francisco State. The degree he'd abandoned at 22, business administration, 2 years completed, stopped when Olivia got pregnant, and the economics of continuing no longer worked, could be finished with the remaining credits, calculated at 2 evenings per week for 2 academic years. He'd walked into the enrollment office on a Tuesday afternoon during his lunch break, slightly self-conscious about being 32 in a room full of people who were predominantly 19, and a counselor named Marcus had looked at his transcript and said, cheerfully, and without any evident awareness of the weight of the moment, Oh, you're actually pretty close. 2 years, give or take. 2 years. He enrolled. Sophia's response, when he told her, was practical and immediate. Now we both have homework, she said. And then, we can do it at the same time, at the kitchen table, which was what they did. 2 evenings a week. Ryan with his business textbooks and Sophia with whatever the school had sent home, sitting across from each other at the kitchen table in the new apartment, occasionally asking each other questions that the other one couldn't answer, but which it helped to ask out loud. What's a supply chain? Sophia asked one evening in April, reading over his shoulder. It's all the steps that happen to make a product before it gets to the person who uses it. She considered this. Like, the rocket has to be built from parts, and the parts have to be made somewhere, and the materials for the parts have to come from somewhere. Exactly like that. So someone has to keep track of all of that. That's basically my job, Ryan said. She looked at him with the evaluating expression. That's more interesting than I thought. He smiled. High praise. She went back to her own work, apparently satisfied. He sat at the kitchen table in the new apartment in the Richmond, in the city that had ground him down and refused to let him go, and did his homework, and listened to his daughter work beside him, and felt something he was getting better at naming. It wasn't the absence of hardship. The job was demanding. School on top of it was exhausting. The new rhythms of the visitation schedule required navigation. Money was better, but still required attention. Life was not suddenly easy. It was not the montage version of things getting better. But there was a quality to the difficulty that was different. It was the difficulty of building something, rather than the difficulty of surviving something. Those are not the same experience, even when the external effort looks similar. Surviving asks everything of you and gives nothing back but the fact of still being there. Building is hard in a way that accumulates. Each hard day adds to the thing rather than just costing you something. Ryan was 32 years old, and for the first time in a long time, the hard days were building toward something he could see. Charlotte called him into her office on a Thursday afternoon in May and told him she'd recommended him for a senior operations role that was opening in the fall. A promotion that came with a team of 8 and a budget and a title that Ryan would need a day or two to stop feeling odd about. You've exceeded what I expected, Charlotte said, and I expected quite a bit. I've made mistakes, Ryan said. You've made recoverable mistakes and learned from them faster than most people I've hired at twice your salary. She looked at him straight. I want you in this role, but I also want to be honest with you. It's going to be more demanding, not less. Are you able to manage that with everything else? He thought about Sophia's dark blue room and the kitchen table homework sessions and the evening program at State and the visitation Saturdays and the careful, slow work of a life reassembling itself into something better than it had been before. Yes, he said. I can manage it. She nodded. Then it's yours. He walked out of her office and stood in the hallway for a moment, just a man in a hallway in an office building, and let the strange, accumulating reality of the past several months sit with him. A year ago, he'd been on a fold-out couch with a bar in the middle, running through the logistics of how to cover rent and school supplies and a legal battle he couldn't afford, holding on by the specific grit of someone who has decided that holding on is the only option. Now he was standing in a hallway being offered a senior role by a woman who'd watched him from a corner he hadn't known about and decided he was worth backing. He didn't know what you called that. Not luck. Luck wasn't the right word for something that required 6 years of unrelenting effort as its precondition. Not destiny, because destiny was a word that flattened the reality of everything that could have broken differently and didn't only because he refused to let it. He didn't have a word for it. Maybe it didn't need one. He walked back to his desk and called Diane and told her, and she said, I told you. And he said, you told me. And they were quiet for a moment together on the phone, sister and brother, and it was enough. Summer came. Sophia turned 8 in June, and Ryan threw her a birthday party that was the first birthday party he'd been able to afford. That wasn't a small dinner with family, and he watched her sit at the center of it with Priya and 4 other kids from her class and argue with elaborate conviction about something he couldn't hear across the park, and felt the particular gladness of watching someone you love be entirely themselves in the world. Olivia came to the party. It was the first time Ryan and Olivia had been in the same place since the courthouse hallway in December, and it was, as he'd expected, not entirely comfortable. They spoke briefly, politely. with the careful good manners of people who have decided that a child's well-being is worth the effort of being decent to each other. Olivia brought Sophia a book about astronauts that was, Sophia later told Ryan privately, actually a really good one, which Ryan took as a meaningful indicator of progress. He watched Olivia watch Sophia across the park, the way her eyes tracked her daughter, the expression she wore when Sophia was looking the other way, the thing in it that he'd seen in the courthouse hallway and that he'd been turning over for months. He'd never fully figured out what to do with his understanding of why Olivia had done what she did, back when Sophia was 14 months old and Olivia had left. He still didn't have a complete account of it. He suspected he never would. But standing in a park in June watching Olivia watch their daughter, he found something that surprised him. Not forgiveness, exactly, because that was too clean a word for something that would always have rough edges. Something closer to the release of a thing he'd been carrying without realizing how heavy it was. The not needing to understand fully. The willingness to let it be complicated and incomplete and human and done. He walked over to where Sophia was arguing with Priya and crouched down. "Everything okay over here?" "We're discussing whether Mars is more interesting than Jupiter," Sophia said. "I'm arguing Mars because it's accessible. Priya is arguing Jupiter because of the moons." "Europa does have a strong case," Ryan said. Sophia looked at him with betrayal. "Whose side are you on?" "I'm Switzerland," Ryan said. "I'm neutral on planetary debates." Priya laughed. Sophia looked disgusted and went back to her argument with renewed energy, apparently energized by opposition. Ryan stood up. He was aware somewhere behind him that Olivia was watching. He didn't turn around. The party went until late afternoon, and when it was over and the other kids had been collected by their parents, and the remnants of the cake had been divided into pieces for Sophia to distribute to the neighbors she liked, Ryan and Sophia walked home through the summer evening with the leftover balloons tied to Sophia's wrist, bouncing above them as they moved. "Good birthday?" Ryan asked. "Best one," she said. Then after a moment, "Mom was nice today." "Yeah, she was." "I think she's trying." Sophia looked at the ground as she walked, thinking it through. "It's slow, but I can see it." Ryan looked at his daughter, 8 years old, walking through a summer evening with birthday balloons tied to her wrist, being more fair-minded about a complicated situation than most adults could manage. He thought about what Charlotte had said, months ago. "She has your tenacity." He thought about Olivia's voice saying it, in a different context to a different audience, with a recognition she hadn't known she was expressing. "Yeah," he said. "I can see it too." They walked home. In October, Ryan finished the first year of his degree program. The marks came back and he'd done well. Not perfectly. There'd been a statistics module that had required 3 late nights and a tutoring session. He wasn't proud of needing, but well overall, in the way that a person who has been out of formal education for a decade does well when they discover they still know how to learn, he told Sophia over dinner. She looked up from her food. "Did you pass everything?" "Yes." "Did you do well?" "Pretty well." She considered this. "What was the hardest part?" "Statistics." She frowned. "Statistics is just patterns. You have to find the pattern in the data and then it tells you what it means." Ryan looked at her. "Have you studied statistics?" "A little, in the advanced math workbook Priya's mom gave me." She went back to eating. "I can help you if it comes up again." He sat across the table from his 8-year-old daughter, who had offered to tutor him in statistics, in the kitchen of the apartment with the dark blue bedroom and the star stickers on the ceiling, in the city they'd survived together, and laughed. Not the polite kind, not the tired kind, the actual kind, the kind that comes from somewhere real. Sophia looked up at the sound of it and started laughing too, without entirely knowing why, because that's the way real laughter works when you're sitting with someone you love. The last Saturday of October was clear, one of those fall days San Francisco occasionally produces when the fog stands down and the sky goes deep blue and the light comes in at an angle that makes everything look more itself than usual. Ryan took Sophia to the Marin Headlands. They drove over the bridge in the early afternoon and hiked up to the ridge above the bay, which was a moderately demanding trail that Sophia handled with the characteristic determination of a person who had strong opinions about her own capability and didn't appreciate them being questioned. She was breathing hard by the last switchback and refused to admit it, and Ryan didn't point it out. They sat at the top on a flat rock and looked out at the bay, and the bridge, and the city behind it, and the sky above all of it, deep blue going darker toward the east where the afternoon was leaning toward evening. Sophia lay back on the rock and looked straight up. "Daddy," she said. "Yeah. When I'm in space, I'll be able to see the whole curve of the Earth. That's true. Do you think it'll feel different, knowing the whole thing is right there?" Ryan looked at the sky. He thought about the apartment on Clement Street, the fold-out couch, the bar in the middle, the specific texture of years of survival. He thought about the letter in the mailbox and the courtroom, and Patricia's voice on the phone, and Charlotte in the coffee shop, and Diane putting money in his account without making it a production. He thought about all the pieces of a life that hadn't gone the way he'd planned, assembled into something he wouldn't trade. "I think it probably feels like seeing something you already knew was true," he said, "but from far enough away that you can see the whole shape of it." Sophia was quiet for a moment, looking at the sky. "I think the years were hard," she said, with the directness she brought to most true things. "For you. The years when it was just us, and it was hard." Ryan looked at her. He hadn't told her much, consciously. She was a child. She shouldn't have been carrying the weight of knowing how close to the edge they'd been some of those years. But Sophia was Sophia, and she'd noticed things, and she'd put them together, and apparently today on a rock in the marine headlands, she had decided to say it out loud. "Yeah," he said, "some of them were pretty hard." She rolled onto her side to look at him. "Are you glad you did it? The hard part?" He thought about this honestly, the way the question deserved. Not the reflexive yes, not the easy version. "Yeah," he said. "I am." He met her eyes. "Not because hard things are good in themselves, but because the hard part was the part where you grew up, and I was there for all of it. Every hard morning and every good one. I got to see all of it." He paused. "That's not a consolation prize. That's the whole thing." Sophia looked at him for a moment. Then she nodded. The nod of someone receiving information they'd suspected was true and were glad to have confirmed. She rolled back onto her back and looked at the sky again. "I'm going to come back," she said. "After I go to space. I'm always going to come back." Ryan looked at the sky with her. The deep blue of it, going darker. The first star of the evening appearing in the east, faint and steady, doing what stars do. Just being there, available to anyone who looked up. "I know," he said. They sat on the rock until the light went gold and then red, and then the kind of dark that isn't fully dark yet. The two of them looking at the sky, a man who'd fought for everything he had, and a girl who was going to reach for things he couldn't yet imagine, both of them exactly where they were supposed to be. The hard years were behind them, not erased, not forgotten. They were in the foundation, in the structure of the people they'd become, visible in the way that things you've survived are visible if you know where to look. You don't outrun the hard years. You carry them forward, and eventually you understand that carrying them is not a burden. It's the proof of what you're made of. Ryan Carter had spent 7 years being afraid of losing the thing he loved most. And in the end, the thing he'd been afraid of losing was also the thing that had made him. The love itself, and the daily work of it, and the specific undecorated commitment of showing up every day for the life that was actually in front of him rather than the easier one he might have had. That is not a lesson you learn once and carry forward clean. It's something you learn in the doing, over and over, in kitchens at 6 in the morning, and courthouse hallways, and hardware stores and new apartments painted dark blue. In prototype pancakes and bookshelf organizations and statistics modules and handwritten thank you notes with rockets drawn at the bottom. In a small girl who grew up knowing, without having to question it, that her father was coming. He always came, and that was everything.